The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Burdinsky. Ralph Tomaselli, the editor of the Record Journal, is on my right, and a special guest in the studio tonight, Len Fasano, the state senator from the mighty 34th Senatorial District, looking for re-election. Len, thanks for coming back on the Citizen Mike Show. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We got a lot of stuff to get to. So let me jump in with maybe your track record for the past 4 years. As you look back over the last 4 years, give us like two examples of things you're most proud of that gave you the most satisfaction, maybe an accomplishment, an achievement, something like that.
I would say that what I'm most proud of are the health care bills that Senator Looney and I worked on bipartisanly. And what we did was we got control over the costs that patients pay at hospitals for certain fees, get rid of surprise billing, and dealing with costs of medical care. And that was done with Senator Looney and I. Now, we did one big bill, and it became so well known that it became a model across the country. Senator Looney had a woman by the name of Dina, and I had Jen Matrowski, who's now a judge, and they were traveling as surrogates of ours across the country. They were being asked to talk about our bill, and it was really good. It really changed. It gave patients rights to hospital records with the right to sue if you don't get them, compatibility between doctors and hospitals with medical records. So that one was really good. We followed that up, and the second thing is in a second bipartisan bill, which are pharmacy benefit managers, and these were set up by federal governments, and they would get these big buy drugs on large scale, and the idea was to bring the cost down. But what was happening is they were making all the money, and the benefit was not going to the consumers. So we passed a bill. We were the second or third in the nation to pass a bill that requires you can't have gag orders. So if you go in to buy a particular drug and it really costs $20 and your copay was $50, the pharmacist wouldn't say, "Don't go through your medical, give me $20, we're good." They would have to stay quiet, because if they said that, they could get fired or fined or something. So you would pay the $50, would only cost $20. The pharmacy would keep some money, and the rest would go to the pharmaceutical company.
That's illegal now?
Now in Connecticut, they can't have that. And a clawback position that allows on certain rebates. So if a certain amount of drugs were bought by this benefit manager, they would get a rebate from the drug company. Well, the consumer would never see that rebate. Now that has to be disclosed. There's clawback provisions which allow that to get to the consumer. So those were two big issues that I think were important that we worked on.
So when Ralph and I go to the pharmacy to stabilize our medications, because it's all about stabilizing the medications, right? So we go to the pharmacy and we want this information that you're talking about. Do we have to specifically ask for it? How does this work?
They are under an obligation, and pharmacists want to do this. They all want to do it because they feel their obligation is to the patient, not to the benefit managers. So they feel as though they want to do it. So now they're just going to do it as a matter of course,
okay,
to let you know, and they have to let you know that you can buy this without going through your policy. It's
and
cheaper.
What's the effective date of that? Was it last year?
Yeah,
this year?
I think the effective date on the prescription drug issue, I think
I want to know about this
2000
stuff, 'cause I didn't know about this.
I think it was at least January 1st, 2018.
All right.
18.
So
So
let's have
those are
some,
two big things.
Yeah, good. Sounds good. It's all good.
Yes, it's good to hear. I was
Yeah.
going to point out that it's good to hear somebody from Senator Fasano's party talking positively about healthcare, because a lot of what I've heard this election season focuses more on the Affordable Care Act and criticism of it. And we recently had some reports that said there were fewer uninsured Connecticut residents than ever, and a lot of credit for that went to the Affordable Care Act. So where do you stand on the ACA?
So what's interesting is that, there is this ability to send out myths and untruths that is easy to grasp onto in the culture that we live in. So what probably is not known is that this year, bipartisanly, we codified most, if not all, of the 10 essential parts of the Affordable Care Act. Several years ago, and I'm going to say at least 6 years ago, we codified that pre-existing conditions must be covered by insurance companies. So we did that, I think, before even President Obama's Affordable Care Act. Connecticut came out with pre-existing conditions must be covered by insurance companies. But recently, we codified this session on a bipartisan basis. 10 of the essential elements of the Affordable Care Act were codified.
Good.
So I want to have some fun.
Okay.
That
Can we
means
describe what fun that
Fun
may be?
for who? Fun
Yeah,
for
exactly.
you? Fun
I need a little bit of a
for Senator
definition.
Fasano?
it starts with a guest.
Okay.
It always starts
Okay,
with a guest.
all right.
First and foremost in my mind all the time. So we want to continue our discussion about the impact of the Trump presidency on state and local candidates, state and local elections. We're not the first to think of this. I mean, it's been well publicized and commented on by national and state columnists, and the point is, I guess, that when voters go to the polls to either vote for local, state, or national elections, not for president, because this is midterm. They probably, many of them, maybe not all of them, but they have in mind what's going on in the White House.
Sure.
And some are turning out of the polls to vote for Trump, even though he's not on the ballot, but he's sort of the ghost candidate. And some turn out to vote against him, and that's why both parties drive for turnout, even though Trump is not on the ballot. So we last episode that you and I did, we said, Trump is fair game to talk about, and what you think of that.
Right, and in fact,
yeah.
Senator Fasano's opponent, Eileen McKean, uses President Trump in at least one of her mailers. Didn't we look
Yeah,
at
that was
that?
during the primary.
Yeah, during the primary. Right.
Yep. So there was a letter to the editor that appeared in the Hartford Courant today. This is Wednesday when we were producing the show, October 24. It's from a fellow in Glastonbury. He writes in part, whether a vote is cast for a Republican governor, senator, or representative, the message is clear. Unless that candidate has specifically come out against Trump or his policies, casting a Republican vote this November is like punching a Trump ticket for validation. Len, we're going to give you a chance to verbally wince, but let me read some more things to get you in the mood for this topic here. Nicholas Kristof, who writes for the New York Times, he's a left-leaning columnist. He wrote, as have many other conservative Republicans, about what has happened to the Republican Party. And so Nicholas Kristof said this, sure, there's still many principled individuals within the Republican Party, but as a national institution, the Republican Party is hollow. National Republican Party is hollow. It is no longer about an ideology. It's about shining President Trump's shoes, and that is the fundamental issue hanging over the midterm elections. And so there's this conservative guy called Max Boot, and he recently wrote a book that is causing some ripples among the political elite, I guess you'd call them, The Corrosion of Conservatism, Why I Left the Right. And he preaches that in order to move past the Trump era, the Republicans have to suffer severe defeats across the board and then rebuild the party. Other people have said that. Andrew Sullivan, a columnist, says that. George Will is saying that. So, Len, the cards you've been dealt, you got to play the hand you've been dealt. The way I read it, you got 3 Trump cards, 2 Stefanowski cards, and 1 Lamont card. I don't even know what I mean by that. But the context of a re-election, Trump is out there. Do you see it helping your candidacy, hurting it? Is it irrelevant to your candidacy? And then my follow-up question is going to be, how much do you admire or not President Trump's presidency? This will help the voters get oriented as to where they want the state to go, red or blue.
So I think President Trump should have no effect upon the state or lower ticket. When I say lower ticket, I'm talking about rep, senator, or gubernatorial. I could see an argument being made at the congressional element, obviously, because those folks go down to Washington, and then you want to know whether you're for Trump or against Trump. You would like to know where they're going to stand. I would say what affects Connecticut has nothing to do with Trump. And the reason why I could say that with a great deal of confidence is as follows. The Senate is 18-18. That's where we were.
18 senators that are Republican and 18 that are Democrat. I just
Correct.
wanted to translate that, yeah.
And, a lot of people said, what's going to happen is that Senate is going to be a miserable dead chamber. At 18-18, nothing's going to pass. It's going to be cat versus dog. And the truth of the matter is that isn't what happened. Senator Looney and I got together and said, we're going to make this work. And we did. And for the first time in Connecticut's history, we passed back-to-back bipartisan budgets.
Well,
And we did that
ahead.
by removing Governor Malloy from the conversations as a mutual, not that I insisted, because I didn't. It came apparent that the way we're going to do this is doing that. Connecticut's future is not dependent upon Trump. Connecticut's future is dependent upon how we're going to bring this state back economically.
I want to get back to we're going to,
Sure.
if we have time, we'll pivot to that sort of Connecticut's future economically. But a case can be made that in view of the Trump presidency and the current Supreme Court, that many issues are being returned to the states, and among them environmental protection. And if the federal protections of the environment are dismantled and left to the states to protect residents with respect to clean air, clean water, let's say, if it's a red state, and there are many in the middle part of the country, they don't much care about environmental protection statutes.
Come on, Mike.
Let me just finish. Let me just finish.
You can't make a statement.
No, I can't.
You can't make a statement like that. No, I'm not going to let you make a statement like that generally unchallenged. You cannot say, in my opinion, because you believe that if Connecticut turns Republican for a state legislature, they're automatically going to reject environment.
Never said that.
That's
Never
what you,
said
that's
that.
what you
I said,
intimated.
here's the
Come
risk,
on.
and here's why it's
That's not fair.
a relevant question. If many people are if the majority is in the state legislature that admire Trump and his policies, they will seek to edge closer to them. That's a possibility in environmental protection. That could be on health care. That could be on voter registration laws. Some would say voter suppression or ID laws or the like. There are many ways that federal policies interplay with state policy. If you don't agree with that and you think, no, I am absolutely wrong on all counts, federal policy is irrelevant, say so and move on.
I would say I totally disagree with you when it comes to, I can't speak to other red states. I can't speak about Texas or Florida. I don't even know all the red states, but I can't talk about it. But I can talk about what we do in Connecticut. And I can tell you that in Connecticut, we as Republicans care about, as I said, we did a bipartisan budget. We protected the Affordable Care Act. We're the ones who said pregnancy was a qualifying event. In other words, before, and let me tell you, the Democrats didn't even like it. They wouldn't pass it the first year we did it, but we pushed it the second year. That if someone is 30 days, after 30 days is still pregnant, they need to be on the they need to have access to the Affordable Care. Pregnancy was not a qualifying event. We said, no, it should be. Now, I don't know what Trump believes in, what Trump doesn't believe in. I don't care. We're going to do what we think is right for the state and right for the environment and right for rights of folks.
And I'm
we
trying to
did equal pay. We did a number of things.
And I'm trying to get those political values out of you to
okay.
see where they are. That's the point of the question.
Okay, then that, as long as it wasn't a conclusion, it sounded like a conclusion question, sort of asking a rhetorical answer.
It's an informed speculation. In this sense, there's a risk that many perceive that if Trumpists take over a state legislature, the state policies will move to the right. Because you're very high up in the state legislature, if you're a Trumpist, you move towards his policies and their consequences. If you say, no, absolutely not, it's impossible to have consequences, I would question your reading of the tea leaves. I mean, that is a risk. And I got Sue Hatfield as evidence in her battle with William Tong. Sue Hatfield says, I want to work with the Trump administration, I want to cooperate, and William Tong, the Democrat, is saying, look out, we're not on board with that. Two people running for state office are running on the interplay between the national government and state government. So it's a question in good faith. This is what people can perceive.
The difference, I would argue, is Sue Hatfield's the Attorney General. She has to enforce laws as she gets them. If federal laws are made up, if the federal government, no help from us, creates a federal law, Sue Hatfield has to enforce that federal law. The question that you're proposing to me is, if the federal government says, we're going to give this power to the states, are we going to say, to look to Trump's administration and say, how would you like that law to look like? I would argue with you and say we're not going to follow his lead where we don't think he's right in what he's saying. Just like if President Obama said, I'm leaving it to the state, I wouldn't assume that every Democrat's going to say, okay, President Obama, what would you like this to be? We'll take our lead. I think that matters come before our Capitol, whether it's from President Obama or President Trump, if that's where they derive from. And I think we have a fair discussion about it, and we have a lot of cross votes. 98% of the legislation is passed bipartisanly out of the Capitol. And I would argue it's probably higher this last session, 1818, because for the first time, I know we're going to get to the budget later, but the first time we had conversations that I've never seen take place in that Capitol. We'll get to that a little later.
Yeah. So Ralph. Mm-hmm. Len doesn't want to play in my Trump sandbox.
Well, maybe I'll
go ahead.
I'll try coming at it from a different, a little different way, and try to be fair about it. No, I will. I want you to start out.
Object to the form of the question,
because I think reasonable minds can agree and disagree on this. But you bring up President Obama and President Trump, and I thought you made some excellent points. About things from Washington and having to react as a state legislator or senator. So I think that's a good point. But I think it's also fair to say the difference between the two presidents, at least one difference, is rhetoric. Certainly, President Trump uses rhetoric in a different way. Okay, good enough. And I think the result of it is that there are certain groups of people that feel like they have a target on their backs. Okay. Good. And one of those groups of people would certainly be Mexican Americans, which Wallingford has a long history of people coming from Mexico to work here, mostly in the steel mills is where they started. So I guess what I'm getting to here as a question is, I think it's fair if you're of Mexican descent and you've heard this rhetoric to wonder, where do all my elected officials stand on this? And so I'd put it in that vein. I mean, how would you address that?
So I would argue that your question is a little bit different than Mike's question. But look, no one could, I don't like the rhetoric. I hate the rhetoric. I don't think it's necessary. I find some of the things he says offensive. I do. For a number of reasons, not only just for the words, but you're the President of the United States. There's a certain decorum that you have to uphold. So I find what he says that people get afraid and disturbed. I could tell you that I certainly do not like what he says. I said to the press, I am not going to comment on everything he says. If I comment on one thing he says that's ridiculous and absurd, which is easy to find, then I'm going to be asked to comment on everything he says. And I haven't got that kind of time. I have to deal with the state of Connecticut, right? So I don't want to play over there. I want to do what's important to me for this state. But I think that if you look at the Republican Senate votes in its entirety, you'll see they're consistent with the belief of, and I don't know where President Trump is on some of things, but same-sex marriage, civil unions, as I said, the Affordable Care Act, the pre-existing conditions, women's rights, equal pay that we just passed collectively. There are a number of issues that we have shown who we are as Connecticut Republicans. But I do not like the rhetoric.
Let me bounce around a little bit.
Sure.
On topics. We'll talk about the governor's race in the state of Connecticut. We've commented on this a few times, and I want to get Len's perspective from someone running as a Republican for the state Senate. And the comments are coming from Kevin Rennie, and I got another one I want to read you in part by Chris Powell. And they're not flattering, but they're also not new. Okay. There have been a lot of columns in the Hartford Courant and in other publication criticizing the campaign of all three
Absolutely.
Candidates. And in particular, they're criticizing the inability of the three candidates to be specific and truthful about how those candidates would close this huge budget gap that is coming up in the next fiscal year. Over 2 years is going to be, according to reports, $4.6 billion, which is huge. So start first with Kevin Rennie towards the end of his article, and this appeared October 21, which is a Sunday Hartford Courant. Kevin Rennie is a lawyer in a former Republican state legislature. He says the most fanciful, I didn't pronounce that right, fanciful people in Connecticut are the three running for governor. The air is full of promises that will not be kept. Republican candidate Bob Stefanowski's calling card is his pledge to eliminate the income tax. It will not happen. The state's commitments and the public's desire for services will not accommodate it. The legislature would never agree to cutting those, no matter what the partisan makeup. Ned Lamont's promising a substantial cut in your local property taxes. The Greenwich Democrat is working his tap shoes to drown out the sound of reality. Ouch. Ouch was mine. Sorry, you will be lucky if your property taxes do not increase next year as a result of the squeeze on local spending that the state imposes on aid to municipalities. Petitioning candidate Oz Griebel wants to reduce the income tax to its original 4.5% level. Not likely, given the other programs he wants to initiate. When the next governor unveils his first budget in 4 months, you will not be surprised that it looks nothing like his campaign promises. You knew better the whole time. So did he. Len, too harsh an analysis by Kevin Rennie?
No.
Ooh, okay. What do you make of the campaigns for governor by all three, knowing you're the one that's going to have to do the heavy lifting to cobble together a budget? I mean, you can't be looking forward to this based on the lack of specificity.
You know, I would say that both attack it from different places. I think Bob Stefanowski's idea of getting rid of the income tax is an aspirational goal, which I admire. I'd rather have someone who's looking towards reducing tax liability as opposed to voting for someone who wants to increase tax liability. I will say that. But I think the ability to get rid of the income tax in 4 years is a difficult, impossible goal. I believe that. I think it can be changed. After 2, I think you could do some changes. I think you do some modifications. I think David Stemmerman, who's an extraordinarily bright guy, had some pretty good ideas in that regard. I think that Ned Lamont's idea of a statewide car tax and things of that nature talk about a different methodology. But in respect to both of these guys, and I say this with respect to both of them, they haven't been up there, so it's a little different. They're coming from the outside. They're trying to get their hands around this thing. They don't know it because they haven't been on the inside, which makes it a very difficult thing for them to express how they're going to do it without really understanding the budget. And it's not a slight to either one of them. It's a reality of the candidates. So I think you got to look at their approaches at 50,000 foot and say, one wants to see if they can reduce taxes. One may want to increase taxes somewhere else, but not looking at reducing the tax liability. Which way do I think works for Connecticut? I think you got to take them at that level, only because they just don't know.
Ralph?
Not to pile on here, but Chris Powell, in about 17 words, I think did a good job here. So I'll read this and then a comment. And this is Chris Powell describing one of the debates. Coherence and accuracy were merely occasional. And he's talking about all the candidates. Relevance was rare. But as always, there was plenty of posturing.
Yeah.
And this is not to dump on the candidates. I read that actually because I believe we get the government that we deserve. And I think rather than always pile on with criticism, the electorate has to take some responsibility. I mean, the truth is how many people really drill down on the issues? The truth is, as journalism could certainly do a better job, not always covering what the candidates say, but what is the truth. I mean, when more people are paying attention to The Voice or some other reality TV show and don't even know the size of the deficit or what the deficit is or even who Len Fasano is, well, that's kind of what you get, and so I just wanted to make that point.
This is a show of opinions. I'm going to give you mine and pass it over to Len and have him swat it aside or whatever. So we're familiar with three candidates. We had two of them on the show. We had Oz Griebel on the show. We had Ned Lamont on the show.
Right.
Oz, he was on the show, certainly a personable, friendly fellow. His idea of solving the deficit problem has some serious flaws, which we raised with him and gave him a chance to address. And one was draining the rainy day fund, which is really intended, and this is going to be a question for Len in a minute when you get a chance, intended for when the economy begins to slow down and has a downturn, not when the economy is doing reasonably mediocrely. So, and to use the rainy day funds in that way, it goes against the intent, but also once you drain the rainy day fund and your plan doesn't work, you're really screwed. You're really screwed. And the other was deferring payments to the teachers' retirement fund and the employees' retirement fund, and their legal prohibitions against doing both. And we asked Oz about that, and he says, "Well, I'll make a call." So that's the problem there. Stefanowski, in my view, just hasn't done the math, and he's selling Connecticut a bill of goods with his hope that. That he's going to get rid of or reduce or strive to reduce the income tax, and I just think that is snake oil. Len Lamont's problem, I think, is he's taken a peek at the math, and it looks pretty horrible. He's somewhat handcuffed by his close relationship with labor, so at least in a campaign setting, it's tough to draw them in. But in certain moments, he's let out that he's done the math, and the math don't work unless you follow some of Ned Lamont's logic. Len, your stage, give me your view. Your view of my view, whatever you want.
I think not making the payments to the pension fund is just plain wrong. So Oz, I like Oz. I get along with Oz. I've talked to Oz quite a bit. Before he announced his candidacy, we talked quite a bit. I just think that that's just a tragic mistake. That's why we have a $70 billion pension liability. That's only going to cause that problem to exacerbate. I think that Bob Stefanowski's thinking we have to get an engine going in our economy, and if we reduce taxes, we can spark that engine.
Not in 4 months, you can't.
Not in 4 months, you can't, and not in 2 years can you make that work. Just can't.
So the question, the premise was 4.6 billion.
How do you solve
over
it?
2 years? How do you solve it? That's how we're getting there, and that's why I
Right.
went on my rant, a minute ago. Yeah.
Well, but the thing I was going to say, and maybe, is unlike the three candidates for governor, Senator Fasano has been living this deficit, no layoff agreement, 60% fixed cost. So he's, whatever else, I don't know what he's going to say, but he's at least lived it. He at least knows the details of it, and maybe he can get us, maybe because of that, he can get us closer to understanding how this deficit issue might be dealt with over the next 2 years. Is that?
Do you want to tackle that?
I will tell you on broad terms, but I will tell you, I think some of the things we have to do is get control of a lot of our quasi-agencies that are spending money like it's water, no accountability to the legislature, a lot of them. That's nipping at the sides, at the edge of the fringe, but it's the beginning of trying to find the money. And I could go through a number of examples, but I know that we're close on time. You have other issues, but that's number one. Number two, we got to get UConn Health to do a partnership. UConn Health, who has medical students, costs $305,000 per student. That's the cost. We can't continue to subsidize that medical school if they're going to spend cost of $305,000. They need to partner with somebody. They promised us for 2 years they're going to do it. I've been the one of calling them in. I've been the one calling them into my office, calling them out. Supposedly they're getting close, but I don't even know what that means anymore. So, but we have to get tough with them and say, we're not going to fund you until we see a partnership agreement. We need to force them. That's going to save us tens of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We need to, you're right with the no layoff, and we've got 2 more years over it. We need to not refill positions on natural people who retire. And it's about 2,000 employees who retire a year. There's some positions we have to fill, but we have to look to promotions, and we got to set ourselves up in after 2 years to privatize different services, such as a lot of DMV. Probably can't do all of it because there's some security and driver's license now with this federal program, but we can do an awful lot of it. When a person came to me just last night and said to me that it took him a half a day to renew his CDL license, truck driver's license, so then I lost a full day of work because a half a day I spent at DMV. We can do better than that. We need to privatize that. We are one of the few states who have dual social service program. That is, the state provides it and non-for-profit provides it. We haven't given nonprofit providers a rate increase in the last 10 years except for 2%, which is just in this budget. We need to let them run it. We need to switch our services over to them, and we could run it cheaper, better. That's not me saying it. It's a bipartisan commission that said that, and we could save the state a ton of money. I think we have to look at the Medicaid and Medicare system and other social services with asset tests. Not in income, but I think we should raise it. People should have more income coming in, frankly. But I think we need to do asset tests. There's a lot of assets they have, and we don't look at that. We need to look at things like that to figure out a better way. All those things that I just said, is that, I know it's 4.6 over 2 years. You got to find $2 billion in 1 year, really, percent it rolls over. No, but it's a healthy chunk of it, and that's something I think we need to do.
Let's bounce around.
Yeah.
Some other topics, and hopefully these are shorter, and then if we have time, we'll circle back to how past budgets might inform future budgets, if we have time to do that. There are 2 ballot questions that will be in front of voters on November 6th. We discussed the ballot question number 2 last week. Ballot question number 1 has to do with the transportation lockbox. Can you quickly, briefly summarize what that's all about and what voters should do with ballot question number 1?
So ballot question number 1 is a lockbox for the transportation fund. We have a special transportation fund that money goes in from your gasoline tax. Money goes into that fund. And what ballot question number 1 says, once that money is in, the legislature nor the governor, nobody could take it out. That's why it's called a lockbox.
Can't sweep it to balance the budget.
Can't sweep it to balance the budget. Is it foolproof? No. You can't let the good get in the way of the perfect, right? So is it perfect? No. But it does stop the legislature, which is amazing that we have to pass this to stop ourselves from doing something, right? But anyway, it passed the House and the Senate, so now it's a constitutional issue on the ballot box. You can't touch it.
Vote yes on question 1.
Vote yes on question 1.
And we agreed vote yes on question 2.
And vote yes on question 2.
Legalizing recreational pot, you in favor or not?
No.
Briefly, be pithy. How come?
Well, one, if it was a good policy idea,
Yeah.
we would have done it. We're doing it, proponents are doing it purely because of money. I don't think we need to sell our souls to fill our coffers.
Climate change, global warming, caused by mankind's burning fossil fuels. A new report came out that reviewed 6,000 other reports, and it had some startling conclusions to it. State policy can reinforce or not measures that would slow mankind's contribution to global warming. And so this is a big deal. This has been in the news a long time. Where do you stand on that issue? And I'll ask you some follow-ups if we don't address it.
I would say I think the Earth is warming. Is it natural or secular or man-made or a combination? I believe that it is being done. I believe there is probably some contribution by man or the world or whatever to the issue. How much and what degree and what effect, I have never really looked at it deeply, so I don't know the degree of which, but I agree that there probably is an impact. I just don't know the degree, only because I have never really researched the issue.
Yeah. It is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a UN-backed body. I've been talking about climate change issues
You have
for
been
8 years.
At least since I
And
started
I've
this
called
show.
it the biggest story of our lifetime.
And in fact, I want to ask you a question about it, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Ask it.
And I keep pounding the issue for whoever will listen. The impacts are gradual, but they get worse and worse and worse over time. And a consensus of scientists say we have to act quickly and decisively, or the damage and the tragedies will only increase. And everyone, in my view, has a role in that. So in The Economist magazine, there is a quick review of this new report that came out. The report presents no new science of its own, but its survey of more than 6,000 studies is meticulous. With every passing year, scientists amass more data about how the climate has already changed, and I'm skipping a lot here. It's only an hour show. But in study after study, page after page, fact after fact, the evidence for anthropogenic climate change, long clear, is harder ever to ignore. Sea levels can rise, hurricanes get worse, populations move and cause wars because of famine and drought, etc. So I think every governmental jurisdiction has some role to play in recognizing this is a real threat and doing reasonable and appropriate measures to sort of address it. I mean, what's reasonable, then that is a fair question we can argue. I just wanted to make that point and get your view, and I think we got your view. But you were going to cause trouble for me.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Because
You were.
and I didn't bring
You
them
had
with
that
me.
twinkle in your eye.
I
Go
know,
ahead.
I think
Go ahead.
because, and I did not bring
Yeah,
any of the articles with me, but
Yeah.
about 2 weeks ago,
yeah.
I got a couple of alerts on my phone, and I think one was from Time, and I want to say one was from another organization. They seem to suggest that, listen, we might have, it may be too late. That we may have already crossed some Rubicon, which I don't understand, that we may not be able to get climate change under control. And I just wondered what, I wanted to ask you.
Well, that is consistent with some of the reports, but there is a debate going on, and this UN report got to it. Should the goal be reducing climate change by 2 degrees centigrade over what it otherwise be, or 1.5, and the relaxed standard is the 1.5, and this argues persuasively that's too lax. You got to reduce the rate of increase by 2 degrees Celsius, or that half a degree, according to studies, means a lot as far as exacerbating all these things that I talked about. Did I answer your?
Well,
I'm not an expert
I
on
don't
it,
mean
but
to be like,
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
it too late?
Some say, most people say no, but depending on the measures you take, if you're pretty relaxed about it and you don't aggressively attack fossil fuel emissions, if you don't aggressively do that, it will be too late. And some say it's too late in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and that's where science may disagree. But the respectable consensus is climate change is real, mankind is causing it, consequences are dire. The exact date, that's subject to debate, and what we can do about it is subject to some debate.
And it seems to me, if there is let's argue that there's a possibility mankind is doing it, just for sake. In other words, I understand you say it is, but let's
No,
take the
I don't
devil's-
say it is.
Or they say it is.
6,000
Yeah.
studies
So-
and more say it is.
but
The
hear me-
consensus
hear
of
me out.
scientists say
Hear
it
me
is.
out.
Yeah.
Let's assume, what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
the doubting Thomases that may be out there
Right.
say maybe. But is it maybe enough to say that we should do something? If you are wrong and mankind is doing it, then you screwed up big time.
You really did.
If it's right that it's so why not play it safe and say, okay, if there's that question mark, why take the risk?
Right.
Isn't that really
Absolutely.
boiled down to,
I would
rather than
agree.
arguing the
That's
side?
our common
say,
ground.
right?
That's our common ground.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay.
That's our common ground right there. Seeing as we have you at the table and we have 12 minutes, we can borrow your expertise and talk about a little about the difficulties you had in putting together the last 2 budgets, and how does that inform us for the difficulties that could be coming up with a budget that, the governor's got to put on the table in 4 months. So the 2 budgets that I'm talking about is the big one in 2000. I think correct me when I go wrong on this one. The heavy lifting was in 2017, and 2018 was sort of fine tuning it and making it more perfect. And when I get to my paper here, it seems like it was a marathon session, 117-day marathon. Senate finally passes a bipartisan budget. But in May 2017, there's a nice picture of everyone shaking hands because they have an interim agreement here. You're quoted. Governor Malloy and Senate Republican leader Len Fasano teamed up to block some last minute this, that, and the other, and it goes on. But the battle would go on until October. And finally, everyone got together, all parties, and he came up with a budget. Here are my notes from Keith Phaneuf as to some of the major things. You were able to save $1.96 million because of concessions negotiated by Malloy, and you told him to find other labor savings, according to Keith Phaneuf. There were tax and fee hikes of $500 million per year. You raided the Energy Conservation Fund for $175 million. You swept the state banking fund for $20 million, and other things. And I raised that and say, holy smokes, a lot of those are one-time measures. How are you going to do it next time around? And then in 2018, everyone was lucky there was a surge in tax receipts because the market was going crazy and people cashed in and capital gains taxes were due. And there were some delays to pay hospitals, about $300 million. So the payment to hospitals was carried over to the next fiscal year, so it'll be booked after the close of the fiscal year, and the budget wasn't so bad. Fill me in. Give me your view. But again, the ultimate question is, how are you going to do this again? And that's the...
So a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, 2017, doing the budget was absolutely fascinating. And here's why. We all started with the governor and Republicans and Democrats, and became sort of understood among the leaders that perhaps the governor being in the room was not the best for us to reach a deal. And look, I've known Senator Looney for 30 years outside of politics, and Marty and I talked, and then we talked to the other leaders and said, what if we just kind of met on our own just to see what happens? And we started to meet. And I would say there were a lot of people who felt we were never going to reach a deal, and a lot of people there were some people who didn't want us to reach a deal. But we had conversations during those 117 days plus that never took place in the Capitol. And because we all kind of know each other at a different level, not just politics, just know each other, we were able to talk about issues that I don't think leaders ever talked about. Like, why is that really important to you? What is the real reason? And why don't you think we should do this? And why don't you think we should do that? And we went into areas that we never talked about before. It was like, they don't want to do this, so we know we can't touch that, and we won't talk about it. But now it was like, no, it's on everything was on the table. And we found more common ground, just that we thought of it differently. We could achieve the end that both of us wanted, but not in the manner that we both thought each other wanted to do it. It was fascinating, and that's the reason why in 2018, that budget we did in less than 30 days, because all of the hard work and understanding of our principles were known. So when we had a little bit of adjustment, we knew exactly how we could fix those adjustments. Now, I disagree with Keith Van if he's the one who said in 2018 you had a spike of income, because we put in our budget that a volatility cap, that if we have a spike in income, and we did, and it wasn't from the capital gains, it was a complicated issue of a 10-year deferment for hedge fund income, and it all came into play in 1 year. We had to put that into our rainy day fund by agreement. So we did not use that to balance the budget. The one-time revenues we took in 17, we did, but when we did for 2018, this fiscal year, we had very, very few one-time revenues, and the budget worked. So the deficit that's coming up is because there are increases in contracts, there are increases in cost of living, the governor's wages that he negotiated, that was a savings in 17 and in 18 are not savings in 19. So that's the reason why we have these deficits, as contract liabilities
Isn't
go
also
up.
spikes in amounts due to the pension funds?
No, the Governor Malloy, I believe, I voted against it, but he refinanced the pension debt, so we have a pretty much even pension liability. It goes out further.
So if that's true, I just want to, this is a critical point for me. I'm interested in this kind of junk. We have, with some of these one-time measures, we have a balanced budget in the fiscal year ending 2019, but beginning in 2019, we go right to a $2 billion deficit. And you're saying it's all cost of living type increases?
I wouldn't say cost of living, contractual obligations.
And the pension funds have nothing to do with increase in amounts due to the pension funds have nothing to do with it.
And if I am wrong, I will send you an email. But it's my understanding.
And we'll read it if you.
Yes, I will double check this, but it's my understanding that the pension liability is built into our budgets already, because Governor refinanced that in 2016 or something, like maybe by 17. I forget exactly when, but he refinanced it. And so it's a set. There's no spike in that.
Okay. We'll.
But I will double check and get back to you.
Continue on. I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought.
So I guess what I'm saying is that there were some one-time revenues, but we planed that out. In 17 we took it, but not in 18. We planed that out. So this budget deficit is due to the increase of contractual liabilities. There may be some other things, and I'll find out what those are. Haven't really focused on that budget yet.
Well, are there any tricks left in your bag? I mean, you've had sweeps, you've accounted for labor savings, all the things that I mentioned. Are there any? You can't repeat that. I mean, you've already accounted for the labor savings, so that's what's concerning.
Right.
And I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, whoa. I mean, he did it once, but.
All right, so we have to solve $2 billion. Some of the things we talked about, Gary and I talked about earlier, would chew away at that $1 billion or $2 billion. We also have to talk any changes to. So Governor Malloy, through the Democrats, continued the CBAC agreement for 10 solid years to 2027. Could you make changes to new employees after 2027? That would mean nobody affected who's employed or gets employed between now and 2027. But after 2027, could you make changes? If you do make those changes, they would have an effect today because of the actuarial system. So that's something that you could look at to get some savings.
Okay.
But I will tell you that I have asked my budget lady, her name is Lisa Hammersley, I think is the smartest person in the state on the budget, to, as of 2 months ago, to start to look at a budget that we could look at starting in the new session, to look at the numbers now.
So
She
as a
hasn't gotten
layman,
back to me.
in the absence of Lenny's explanation, here's my concern, and then we're beginning to run out of time.
Yeah.
I see the difficulty of the 100 and some odd days that the Senate, they struggled, even with good personal relationships, they struggled to come up, with a budget. The labor savings as a result of the CBAC agreement was all accounted for sort of in that year. And with these other one-time things, these other one-time techniques, the budget deficit, the budget gaps were able to be closed in 2017 and again in 2018. Now you have $2 billion the first year and a governor who will not tolerate, they say,
Right.
Any income tax increases. And the math isn't there. I mean, the math, and that's why. That's what, you've answered the question admirably. I just want to sort of explain, my sort of skepticism. So I look at the budget next year and I say, Lenny, you are in big trouble. Just as a legislator, as a Republican leader, I know the pain you're going to feel. You're more optimistic than you should be. I know this isn't going to be absolutely impossible. Beware of what you wish for. I mean, you're not going to see any revenues, or someone's going to be screaming you breached your campaign promises, right? If Stefanowski wins, that's all I'm.
I think
that's where I'm coming from. And again, it's sort of a good faith befuddlement. When I started preparing for this show, and I saw the struggles you went through. You get the final word. You get your closing argument right now. So.
Well, I agree with you. The task is not going to be anywhere easy. And look, the one thing I will say is we have to protect social services. I think that's important. We have to protect education, and we have to protect municipalities. Those are halos that we have to carve around. And if that means we got to look at other ways of revenue, well, you know what? We have an obligation. The only thing I will say is 7 years ago, the top 11 taxpayers paid $650 million to this state. As of 2017, the top 11 taxpayers pay under $240 million. We lost $400 million. And real fast, I had a meeting with Steve Cohen. He is the largest taxpayer in the state of Connecticut. He is, as he puts it, this close to leaving this state. His daughter's graduating this spring, and he has a whole series of kids, but they're all in college except for this daughter. And he said, Len, I don't know why I would want to stay here. That's a double-digit, tens of millions of dollars that he pays in income taxes to the state of Connecticut. We lose just 5 of them. That could be as much as $100 million hole again to our budget. So when you talk about revenue, you need to keep that in perspective of what we have to do. That's the reason why Dave Stemmerman's idea of shifting this liability around in a particular manner. Companies say, look, I don't really mind paying taxes, but what I mind is not knowing what it's going to be year end to the next. You say, not going to tax this, then you can tax it. Now we're not going to tax it. I can't plan a 5-year plan to stay in the state because you guys don't have consistency.
I think it's a very fair point. I mean,
Yeah, I do.
very, how you solve that
We need consistency, whatever that means.
is another matter. Let's make that the final word. That work for you?
Absolutely. Yes.
Len, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show.
Thank you
We
again for
had
having
fun.
me.
I hope you did too.
I did. I always do.
All right. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. We do appreciate it. Ralph and I are here on Wednesdays. You can see the show on Thursdays for the first time on WPAA at 9 o'clock. Then on Friday, then on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 9 o'clock. And there's also, the show is posted up on YouTube. Search for it using the Citizen Mike Wallingford channel or contact me through the studio, and I can send you an email link that'll take you right to the Citizen Mike Show as posted up on YouTube. Thanks, be safe, good night, and thanks again to Len Fasano.
Thank you.